This video is kindly sponsored by World of Warships. In the annals of World War II, the Blitzkrieg stands as one of the most formidable and revolutionary tactics of warfare. The very name evokes images of swift, modern, mechanized assaults that shattered enemy lines and reshaped the battlefields. Blitzkrieg, or lightning war, relied on the unprecedented speed and coordination of tanks, aircraft and infantry. Yet beneath this veneer of modernity, an unexpected force played a crucial role in Germany's war machine. The humble horse, an ancient companion of mankind, was the hidden backbone of the Wehrmacht. In an era dominated by the roar of engines and the clatter of machinery, these noble animals quietly bore the burden of war with the soldiers. Big thank you to World of Warships for sponsoring today's episode. World of Warships is a free-to-play naval warfare game on PC, featuring new content every month. With thrilling 12v12 battles with new ships, nations, cosmetics and ship classes.
Soldiers, sailors and airmen of the Allied Expeditionary Force.
Join the special 80th anniversary D-Day event, command legendary vessels, strategize with your fleet and dominate the seas in battles inspired by June 6, 1944. Unlock exclusive rewards and honour history's heroes. Unlock new ships, D-Day PvE and PvP missions, historical commanders and customizations. US naval firepower was the stepping stone in the Allied conquest of Europe in 1944. Experience the historical significance of American ships in naval warfare with special updates and events. Enjoy top-notch graphics and diverse gameplay modes, and World of Warships is also available on consoles. Use the code D-Day80th during registration to get 200 doubloons, 1 million credits, 7 days of premium account time, a free ship after 15 battles, and 3 special D-Day missions after 9 battles. New users only. So make sure to download World of Warships using the link in the description. Despite the look of mass machinery and the era of the Tiger tanks, Panzers and so on, the German army utilised more than 2.75 million horses throughout the conflict. These steadfast creatures pulled artillery, transported supplies and provided mobility in terrains where machines faltered and most importantly became the unsung heroes of the Blitzkrieg era. By 1939, the German Reich had amassed a formidable force of 3.8 million horses, designated for use by the German cavalry in World War II. Initially, 885,000 of these horses were conscripted into the Wehrmacht to serve various roles including saddle, draft, and pack animals. Among these, 435,000 were seized from conquered territories such as the USSR, France and Poland. To bolster their equine ranks further, Germany also procured additional horses from countries like Hungary, Romania, Czechoslovakia and Ireland. This extensive reliance on horses was crucial for the German military's logistics and mobility throughout the war. Klaus Christian Richter, who was part of the 1935 German cavalry class, reflected on the physical and psychological strains of war in his book Cavalry of the Wehrmacht 1941 and 1945. He noted that traditional soldierly virtues such as courage, a sense of duty, responsibility, comradeship and a love for horses proved invaluable. German riding schools, along with their horses and riders, were of exceptional quality. From 1930 to 1940, they participated in every significant international event, culminating in a remarkable triumph at the 1936 Olympics. The German team won 6 equestrian gold medals and 1 silver, achieving dominance in all 3 disciplines: dressage, jumping and military. This extraordinary accomplishment has never been replicated. Before 1935, enlisted men and NCOs in the German cavalry underwent an extensive 12-year military service, which included up to 3,000 hours of basic rider training. This rigorous training established a strong foundation for the horse-mounted troops. However, as Germany geared up for war, the training emphasis shifted, reducing rider training to an average of 1 hour per day to focus more on weapons and combat strategies. Despite these changes, horse troopers trained just as intensively as the infantry. Their duties, primarily reconnaissance and scouting, required them to endure demanding training sessions, often covering 30 to 60 miles a day in the saddle, with each horse carrying up to 250 pounds of man and equipment. Many German soldiers were familiar with working the fertile farmlands of Germany, where animals, especially horses, played a crucial role in their daily lives. These soldiers shared a deep bond with their horses, rooted in their agrarian background. Contrary to the popular image of the German military as a formidable force of tanks, armoured vehicles, troop transports and trucks, much of the heavy lifting was actually performed by horses. Additionally, numerous troops served on horseback in the German cavalry. Special committees selected these horses, purchasing them at 3 years old and starting their training at 4, which continued for another 2 years in a program unmatched by any other nation. As the demands of the war increased, heavy draft horses were brought into service to handle the growing weight of wagon loads. Following the fall of France, several Berber horses also joined the Wehrmacht ranks. The unloaded wagons themselves weighed between 610 to 1,040 kilograms and often required teams of 4 to 6 horses to pull them, especially when navigating the challenging terrain and rough roads of the Eastern Front. This reliance on horses underscored the vital role these animals played in the German military's logistics and operations during the war. On September 1st, 1939, with the German invasion of Poland, 2 major German army groups, North and South, spearheaded the offensive. The German cavalry played a crucial role from the beginning, with the 1st Cavalry Brigade guarding the eastern flank of the 3rd Army. Concurrently, the 1st Mounted Regiment was stationed in the Fürstenwalder Forest to attack Mechanization, followed by the 2nd Mounted Regiment to the east. Throughout the first week of September, the 1st Cavalry Brigade continued its operations, including night attacks around Rosen, Pultusk and Ostro-Mazowiecki. The early weeks in Poland were marked by intense combat and harsh conditions for both horse and rider. German and Polish cavalry units faced numerous challenges, including navigating burning villages and enduring artillery fire. One notable incident involved the German 14th Army's reconnaissance unit inadvertently camping near a Polish cavalry regiment. The German 1st Cavalry Brigade concluded its offensive role by September 21st, but participated in one last significant battle on September 23rd near Krasnobrod, where they defeated a force of Polish Uhlans. The campaign ended with Warsaw's capture on September 27, 1939, shortly after the Soviet invasion. Post-occupation, the Waffen-SS cavalry was tasked with quelling partisan activity involving weapon searches, hunting partisans, and protecting ethnic Germans. After the invasion of Poland, the German forces shifted their focus to the Nordic countries before advancing westward. Although the seaborne landing in Norway was successful, it resulted in significant naval losses for the Germans, which later impacted their strategy against Britain. The heavy losses included half of Germany's destroyers and nearly a third of her cruisers. Despite these setbacks, the German cavalry remained integral to their military operations, playing key roles in various campaigns. In the Western Campaign, the cavalry continued to be a crucial asset. The invasion plan, initially scheduled for November 1939, was delayed and revised after the original plans fell into Allied hands. On May 10, 1940, German troops launched a coordinated attack on Luxembourg, Belgium and Holland, utilising 136 divisions. The success of these operations was attributed to precise attacks by aircraft and panzer divisions, but the cavalry also played a significant role. In Holland, the 1st Mounted Regiment of the 1st Cavalry Division attached to the 18th Army advanced almost 3 kilometers within the first 20 minutes of the campaign. By the second day, German cavalry had covered approximately 180 kilometers over difficult terrain. The German cavalry also demonstrated their effectiveness in France. On June 9th, the reconnaissance squadron of the 6th Infantry Division, led by Lieutenant von Berzelage, became the first Germans to cross the Seine River. Despite facing resistance and exchanging fire across the banks, they successfully crossed, furthering the German advance into France. The 1st Cavalry Brigade, now expanded into a division, saw action in both Belgium and France, tasked with sending scouts ahead of the infantry and protecting the left flank of the corps. In one tragic incident near Moulins, the French used riderless horses to detonate mines, resulting in significant horse casualties. The culmination of the German cavalry's efforts in the Western campaign occurred during the attempt to cross the Loire River on June 19th. Facing the cadets of the prestigious cavalry school at Saumur, the German cavalry engaged in intense combat, including hand-to-hand fighting. Despite fierce resistance, the Germans prevailed after 2 days, securing the crossing of the Loire River. Throughout these campaigns, the German cavalry proved their versatility and resilience, playing a pivotal role in the rapid and effective movements of the Wehrmacht across various terrains and against formidable defences. After the surrender of France, Hitler's next major target was Great Britain. Churchill's refusal to negotiate peace prompted Hitler to initiate an aerial assault intended to pave the way for an invasion. This led to the Battle of Britain, where Germany's air attacks were ultimately repelled, resulting in a British victory. The significant naval losses Germany had previously sustained were felt acutely, as the planned land invasion, known as Operation Sea Lion, was heavily dependent on air superiority. Without control of the skies, the invasion could not proceed. Operation Sea Lion was intended to follow the success of the aerial campaign with a land assault that required substantial sea transport. The plan involved not only the transportation of soldiers, but also a large number of horses, which were integral to the German military strategy. The first wave of the invasion was projected to require 4,200 horses, with an additional 7,000 in the second wave. This undertaking would have demanded extensive preparation, resources and time, including training the horses to board ships and remain calm during the sea voyage across the English Channel. Ultimately, Operation Sea Lion was never executed, but preparations had begun, including the sea training for horses. The failure of the aerial campaign against Britain meant that the ambitious plan for a land invasion had to be abandoned. Despite the meticulous planning and resource allocation, the inability to achieve air superiority rendered the operation impossible, highlighting the crucial interplay between air, land and naval forces in wartime strategy. Horsemanship was also a significant component of the curriculum at SS academies, reflecting the Nazis' idealized connection to the Teutonic Knights' legacy. This training was integral to fostering the skills and discipline the Germans revered. The reality of wartime Europe was brutal. Horses were a common sight on roads and fields, falling victim to machine guns, mortars, artillery fire and air attacks. But how did the myth of the mass German mechanization spread? It proliferated through war propaganda. For instance, Nazi propaganda minister Joseph Goebbels censored newsreel images to present Hitler in a favourable light with armoury. This selective portrayal extended to combat footage, emphasising the efficiency and menace of tanks and planes over horses, especially in the early years of 1940 to 1943. In literary works like Field Marshal Erich von Manstein's Lost Victories and Field Marshal Heinz Guderian's Panzerlieder, horses, the backbone of the German army, received scant mention. Guderian did acknowledge that units working with foot soldiers would do better to remain horse-drawn, but such admissions were rare and often overshadowed by the emphasis on mechanized warfare. On June 22, 1941, the German army invaded the Soviet Union, also known as Operation Barbarossa, utilizing 750,000 horses primarily for artillery and transportation. The German and other Axis forces, numbering 3.5 million men and 153 German divisions, quickly advanced along a front stretching from the Baltic to the Black Seas. Due to their rapid progress, both cavalry and infantry often had to abandon exhausted horses and proceed on foot. The infantry divisions employed 4,800 horses and 918 horse-drawn transport vehicles each. Operation Barbarossa positioned the 1st Cavalry Division with the 24th Motorized Corps of the 2nd Panzer Group in Army Group Center. The 1st and 2nd Cavalry Brigades were the first to cross the River Bug on the morning of June 23rd, entering the Soviet Union and anticipating tank attacks. The horses and soldiers quickly became exhausted within the first few days and weeks of the campaign, covering miles upon miles daily. The relentless pace took a heavy toll, particularly under the sweltering Russian summer heat. Horses frequently collapsed and died from the combined effects of heat and exhaustion. There are numerous first-hand accounts of soldiers having to halt their progress just so their horses could rest. In many instances, the horses were so fatigued that they refused to get up, leaving the soldiers with no choice but to abandon them. Often these abandoned horses were left in the care of Russian villagers. The soldiers themselves were not spared from the grueling conditions. Marching long distances with insufficient rest, their physical and mental stamina were severely tested. The scarcity of food and water, combined with the oppressive heat, made each day a struggle for survival. These hardships were compounded by the poor condition of the roads and the constant threat of enemy skirmishes, which further drained their strength and morale. The German cavalry faced severe challenges, especially from Soviet air attacks that caused panic and disarray among the horsemen. The Soviet forces, including the Cossacks under General Lev Mikhailovich Dovator, effectively disrupted German communications. Commanding the SS cavalry, Hermann Fegelein emphasized the SS cavalry's role, often exaggerating their importance. The SS and Wehrmacht cavalry units played both offensive and defensive roles during the campaign, engaging in a variety of operations from pursuing retreating Soviet forces to engaging in direct combat. These cavalry units were often at the forefront of the offensive, tasked with swift maneuvers designed to encircle and disrupt Soviet formations. One notable instance of their offensive role occurred during the initial stages of Operation Barbarossa. As German forces advanced into Soviet territory, cavalry units were deployed to pursue retreating Soviet troops, aiming to prevent them from regrouping and mounting a counter-offensive. The cavalry's speed and mobility were critical in these operations, allowing them to exploit gaps in the Soviet lines and capture key strategic points. During the Battle of Białystok-Minsk, for example, Wehrmacht cavalry units were instrumental in surrounding and capturing large numbers of Soviet soldiers. Their ability to swiftly traverse difficult terrain enabled them to outflank Soviet positions, leading to significant victories and the capture of substantial enemy resources. However, the cavalry units were not only used for offensive operations, they also played crucial defensive roles, particularly in protecting the flanks of advancing infantry and armoured divisions. During the brutal winter months when the German advance stalled and the Soviets began their counter-offensive, these cavalry units were often called upon to hold the line against overwhelming odds. The 1st Cavalry Division once again found themselves occupying the Pripet Marshes, a vast wetland stretching over 200 miles from east to west and covering more than 100,000 square miles. This unique and challenging terrain consisted of a mix of dry and wet areas, crisscrossed by rivers and basins, and characterized by dense forests and varied habitats. The marshes were home to a variety of wildlife, including boars, wolves, fowl, and insects, and also served as a refuge for Soviet and Polish partisans. Operations in the Pripet Marshes were a continuation of those begun during the Polish campaign. The SS Cavalry Brigade, which included the 1st and 2nd Cavalry Regiments, occupied the Pripet Marshes around the same time as the Wehrmacht's cavalry units. The conditions in the marshes posed significant challenges for both sides. The wet, boggy ground made movement difficult and hindered the effectiveness of traditional cavalry tactics, requiring adaptation and resourcefulness from the troops. Combat in the Pripet Marshes was intense and often brutal. The marshy terrain favoured the partisans, who utilised their knowledge of the land to launch ambushes and raids on German forces. The 1st Cavalry Division, alongside the SS Cavalry Brigade, engaged in numerous skirmishes with these irregular fighters. One account describes a night operation where a Wehrmacht cavalry patrol was ambushed by partisans while crossing a narrow river. The ensuing firefight was chaotic, with visibility severely limited by the thick vegetation and darkness. Despite their training and discipline, the cavalrymen found themselves in a desperate struggle to repel the attackers and escape the ambush. Tragically, the Pripet Marshes became the site of atrocities committed by the SS Cavalry. During their anti-partisan operations, SS units killed civilians suspected of aiding partisans who had previously attacked German positions. This brutal campaign led to the deaths of many civilians, both those with connections to the partisans and those who were entirely innocent, caught in the deadly repercussions of the conflict. By August 1941, the German forces began to struggle with the onset of cold weather, a situation that rapidly deteriorated as the months progressed. September brought relentless rains that turned the ground into a quagmire of thick, clinging mud, severely hindering movement and logistical operations. By October, the weather took an even harsher turn, with the arrival of snow and freezing winds marking the early onset of a brutal winter. The horses, essential to the German military for transportation and supply, suffered immensely. The lack of adequate fodder led to widespread starvation among the animals. Many horses, weakened by hunger and overwork, succumbed to the harsh conditions, dying from a combination of starvation and exhaustion. The loss of these horses further strained the already struggling supply lines, creating a dire situation for the German troops. The harsh winter conditions had a devastating impact on the soldiers as well. Frostbite became a common affliction, with many soldiers losing fingers, toes, and even limbs to the severe cold. The inadequate winter clothing and gear issued to the troops exacerbated these problems, leaving them ill-equipped to deal with the freezing temperatures. Pneumonia and other respiratory illnesses spread rapidly through the ranks, weakening the soldiers' ability to fight and survive. One stark account from the Eastern Front described a company of Wehrmacht soldiers caught in a sudden blizzard. The temperature plummeted and the men, already exhausted and hungry, struggled to set up any semblance of shelter. As the night wore on, the cold became unbearable. By morning, several soldiers had succumbed to the freezing temperatures, their bodies found huddled together in a futile attempt to share warmth. Combat operations in these conditions were exceedingly difficult for cavalry and infantry. One account from a German infantryman of the Cavalry Division described a bitter engagement with Soviet forces during a snowstorm. Visibility was nearly zero, and the freezing winds cut through even the thickest clothing. Both sides struggled to maneuver and maintain their positions, with frostbite and hypothermia claiming almost as many lives as enemy bullets. The German soldiers, demoralized and physically depleted, found it increasingly hard to mount effective offensives or defend their positions. The horses that did survive the initial onslaught of starvation and exhaustion faced their own set of challenges. The cold weather and icy terrain made it difficult for them to find footing, leading to injuries and further losses. The few that remained became even more critical to the Germans' ability to transport supplies and wounded soldiers, yet their numbers dwindled daily.
The air bites with a chill that penetrates through our uniforms. Autumn's golden hues have long faded, giving way to a relentless cold that signals the impending winter. Our horses, our trusted companions, are weary but still push forward through the treacherous terrain. The ground is a mixture of thick, cloying mud and patches of early snow. The mud clings to their hooves, making every step a Herculean effort. We are stationed near Vyazma. The landscape is a desolate expanse of grey and white. Supplies are running thin, and the men are growing despondent. Each night we huddle together for warmth, the temperatures plummeting as soon as the sun dips below the horizon. The wind howls through our makeshift camp, carrying with it the scent of decay and the distant rumble of artillery. Our horses suffer alongside us. Johann, one of our youngest recruits, lost his horse yesterday. The poor creature, unable to endure the cold and the exertion, collapsed and never rose again. Johann wept openly, a rare sight among us hardened soldiers. The bond between a cavalryman and his horse is something only we can understand. We buried the animal hastily, a simple marker left to commemorate its sacrifice. The mud has worsened, now mixed with slush that saps the strength from both man and beast. Progress is agonizingly slow. The Russians have not given us a moment's respite. Ambushes and skirmishes are frequent. Yesterday, during a reconnaissance mission, we encountered a Russian patrol. The engagement was swift but brutal. We managed to repel them, but at a cost. I watched as Klaus, my friend since training, was thrown from his horse. A bullet found him before he hit the ground. I dragged him back to our lines, but he was already gone, his lifeless eyes staring at the overcast sky. Our division was ordered to advance through a heavily wooded area. The trees, skeletal and devoid of leaves, provided little cover. The ground beneath was a quagmire. We heard the distant crack of rifle fire, and then it was upon us. Horses and men alike screamed as they fell. My horse Blitz stumbled but kept going. I owe my life to his endurance. We charged the Russian position, sabers drawn. The melee was chaotic, a blur of steel and blood. Blitz was hit. I felt him shudder beneath me before he collapsed. I managed to roll clear, but not before a Russian bayonet found my shoulder. The pain was blinding, but adrenaline kept me moving. We drove the Russians back, but at a grievous cost. I returned to find Blitz still breathing but barely. With tears streaming down my face, I ended his suffering. His death felt like a personal loss, a wound that cuts deeper than the physical injuries I bear. We have been ordered to hold a defensive position. The cold is now unrelenting, and the first heavy snow has fallen. It is both a curse and a blessing, as it slows the enemy but saps our already dwindling strength. Frostbite is a constant threat. Our horses, those that remain, are gaunt and exhausted. They look at us with eyes that reflect our own despair. The night is eerily quiet. As I sit here writing by the dim light of a lantern, I cannot help but think of home. The warmth of the hearth, the laughter of family, all seem like distant dreams. War has a way of stripping a man down to his core, exposing fears and vulnerabilities hidden beneath the surface. A heavy snowstorm hit today. Visibility is near zero, and the cold is unlike anything I have ever experienced. We are essentially immobilized. The men huddle together, sharing what little warmth they can. Our horses are barely alive, shivering uncontrollably. Morale is at an all-time low. We hear rumors of impending reinforcements, but they seem like empty promises. Another skirmish with the Russians today. We managed to hold our ground, but the cost was high. I wonder how much longer we can endure. The Eastern Front is an unforgiving place, where the elements are as much an enemy as the Russians.
On November 5th, 1941, the German High Command made a significant strategic shift by disbanding their cavalry units. The decision marked the end of an era as the cavalry was converted into the 24th Armoured Division. This transformation was part of the broader mechanization efforts within the German military, reflecting the evolving nature of warfare. However, this did not mean the end of the use of horses within the German army. Despite the disbandment of cavalry units, horses continued to play an essential role in the logistics of the German military, particularly for short-distance supply transport. The conversion to the 24th Armoured Division was intended to bolster the German offensive capabilities with more modern and mechanised forces. The newly formed Armoured Division received tanks, armoured personnel carriers and other mechanised equipment, aiming to increase its effectiveness on the rapidly changing front lines of the Eastern Front. This transition highlighted the increasing importance of armoured warfare and the need for greater mobility and firepower in the face of the Soviet Union's vast and rugged terrain. While the emphasis shifted to mechanization, the reality on the ground remained that horses were indispensable for many logistical tasks. The harsh conditions and inadequate infrastructure of the Eastern Front made it difficult for mechanized vehicles to operate effectively, particularly in the muddy and snowy conditions that plagued the region. As a result, horses were reassigned to pulling wagons, artillery pieces and other equipment. One soldier's account from the winter of 1941-1942 vividly describes the scene. With the tanks and trucks often immobilized by the mud and snow, our horses became lifelines. They pulled supply wagons through terrain that seemed impassable, their strength and endurance a stark contrast to the mechanical failures we frequently encountered. Without them, our ability to transport ammunition, food, and medical supplies to the front lines would have been severely compromised. By mid-November 1941, the harsh realities of the Eastern Front became starkly evident as 85% of the vehicles used by the German forces in Russia were out of commission. The extreme conditions, including mud, snow and freezing temperatures, took a heavy toll on the mechanized units, rendering them largely inoperative. This mechanical attrition necessitated the implementation of a relay system for horse-drawn supply trains, which became crucial for maintaining the flow of supplies to the front lines. The German Sixth Army, facing increasingly dire conditions, made the desperate decision to send most of their horses to the rear. As the situation deteriorated further during the retreat from Stalingrad, the remaining horses were slaughtered for food to sustain the starving troops. This grim measure underscored the severe supply shortages and the extreme measures the soldiers had to resort to in order to survive. From this moment, horses died on the battlefields at a staggering rate of 1,000 each day. They succumbed to a variety of fatal wounds caused by shell explosions, bullets, hand grenades and fires. The intense combat environment took a severe toll on these animals, with many falling victim to the relentless barrage of artillery and gunfire. Beyond combat injuries, horses also suffered immensely from exhaustion as they were pushed to their limits transporting heavy loads and navigating difficult terrain. Exposure to the elements added to their plight, with harsh weather conditions leading to hypothermia and other fatal complications. Starvation was another common cause of death as supply lines faltered and adequate fodder became increasingly scarce. One German gunner remarked, "Our route is lined by dead horses that have broken their legs or collapsed through sheer exhaustion." This grim observation painted a vivid picture of the harrowing conditions faced by both soldiers and their horses. The sight of lifeless and suffering animals littering the path was a constant reminder of the relentless hardships of war. A German general echoed this sentiment, describing the battlefield as a sight full of dead horses. Some horses were only half dead, standing on 3 frozen legs, shaking the remaining broken one. His account highlighted the gruesome reality that not all horses died instantly. Many endured prolonged agony, standing in a state of shock and pain, unable to move or find relief from their injuries. In February 1943, the German cavalry units were revived under the command of von Boeselager, who had convinced Field Marshal von Kluge to form the Boeselager Mounted Force. Despite the challenge of pulling men from infantry units, von Boeselager managed to assemble his force, including some Cossack recruits. By April 1943, the German cavalry was officially reinstated and designated as the Cavalry Regiment Centre, soon followed by the formation of Cavalry Regiment North and South. These regiments primarily focused on partisan patrols. In January 1944, the Germans unsuccessfully attempted to capture the Danube Line near Novgorod, resulting in significant losses for Cavalry Regiment North. After the capture, they were ordered to evacuate, mirroring other evacuations across the Crimean Peninsula. Despite their usefulness on the Eastern Front, the new cavalry regiments faced a tragic turn. When the Germans evacuated Crimea in May 1944, they faced the dilemma of preventing their 30,000 horses from falling into Soviet hands. Initially, veterinarians were tasked with shooting the horses and disposing of the bodies, but as the process proved too slow, chaos ensued, and the horses were driven off cliffs and killed by machine guns. This moment of tragedy is epitomized by a soldier's poignant farewell to his horse, Paprika. The soldier described hiding his tender feelings behind a mask of anger, expressing deep sorrow as he said goodbye. Paprika, who had shown affection by nuzzling her head against his chest, was destined for a peaceful retirement in Berlin, a plan now shattered by the cruel realities of war. The heartfelt farewell underscores the bond between soldiers and their mounts, highlighting the grief and sorrow brought on by the brutal necessities of war. One of the leading issues with Germany's retreat west from 1943 to 1945 was feeding horses. It posed significant logistical challenges for the German army. According to World War I plans, horses could not operate more than 25 miles from a railhead without fodder supplies, taking up more space than essential military equipment like rifles and ammunition. Despite this, during World War II, some infantry units operated as far as 90 miles from the nearest railhead. Horses required an estimated 53 tons of food daily per division. In World War I, those in German Army Group A consumed nearly 1.5 million pounds of fodder daily, which filled 97 railroad cars. Large horses could eat up to 20 pounds each day. During one summer month in 1941, the Germans requisitioned 112 tons of oats and 768 tons of hay from Russian farms. Some starved soldiers were even tried for eating oats meant for horses. The horses, suffering from hunger, gnawed on walls, wooden beams and tree trunks. Their cotton feed bags rotted and roughage often arrived mouldy, exacerbating the supply issues. The German battle of annihilation against the Soviet Union succeeded at first. German units advanced nearly 500 miles into Soviet territory along a front of nearly 1,000 miles, but soldiers ignored horses that coughed from dust, bolted from shell explosions, and died from exertion and heart attacks. One soldier wrote about the endless wasteland. There is no rest. Always the same advance through treeless plains, in thick clouds of dust, along endless roads, column after column, horses, rider and artillery like ghosts. As World War II dragged on around 1944, the German army became even more dependent on horses. One German staff officer admitted, "At times, horses are the last and only thing we can rely on. Thanks to them, we made it through the winter, even if they died in their thousands from exhaustion, lack of fodder, and their tremendous exertions." A veterinarian officer also remarked, "In spite of Hitler's marked opposition to horses, the number of horses serving with our forces in the east grew steadily as the war went on, an indication that the use of horses was a compelling necessity." Some German soldiers bonded with their horses. One major wrote, "The drivers would keep the horses behind houses at night and strap blankets on them as well to try to shelter them from the wind. The horses had winter coats of fur which helped them, although a few of them died at night from the cold." Another soldier wrote, "In all the many months Siegfried has been my comrade, my protector. He has carried me out of trouble many times. He has listened for me and warned me of any danger. I had always relied upon him in 1001 situations. I had cried on his shoulder when I was in despair, and he had even made me laugh at some of his antics. He had never complained when I had nothing to give him, not even water. To me he had not been just a horse, he had been my best friend, a friend in 1,000, full of warmth and understanding." Both men and beasts struggled to survive during World War II. "Man becomes an animal," one writer lamented. "The battle returns here to its most primeval animal-like form." Several million Germans and around 1.5 million horses died, but as von Manstein said, the personal element obviously did not interest Hitler in the least. To him, human beings were merely tools in the service of his political ambitions. In March 1945, the last German cavalry troops participated in defensive operations along the Danube River and later surrendered to the British in Austria. After a final march through Württemberg in June 1945, they were briefly held as prisoners of war before being released. Their horses were returned to local farmers for care. The two German cavalry divisions of the Waffen-SS, after 2 years of fighting on the Eastern Front, were decimated in the intense battles around Budapest, which fell to Soviet forces on February 11, 1945. Wehrmacht cavalry units, consisting of anti-communist Cossack volunteers, surrendered to the British. Despite assurances of safety, they were forcibly repatriated to the Soviets, who viewed them as traitors. The common soldiers received 8-year sentences in the Gulag, while higher-ranking officers were executed. The contrast between the propagandized image and the reality of the Second World War highlights significant misconceptions about the conflict, particularly regarding the German forces. Despite the prevalent portrayal of a modern, mechanized military dominated by panzers and other machinery, horses played a crucial role within the German army. Serving as cavalry mounts and artillery pack animals, horses were instrumental across various campaigns, navigating French rivers and Russian tundras and carrying supplies and artillery. While propaganda emphasized the formidable power of steel machines, the horse remained the vital, living force behind much of the German army's mobility. Nearly 3 million horses were recorded in service, performing duties from pulling ambulances and field kitchens to scouting and patrolling. The true number of horses involved may never be fully known. Horses occupied a significant position within the German ranks, often overshadowed by the image of an ironclad military. They were integral to operations in various theatres, from Polish soil to preparations for crossing the English Channel, and they too suffered in the war's devastation. Initially imposed by the Treaty of Versailles, the use of horses persisted as the Nazis faced resource shortages in their push for modernization and global dominance. The reliance on horses required substantial resources for their care, including fodder and veterinary services, illustrating the logistical challenges of maintaining such a large number of animals. The end of cavalry, including the German cavalry, was an inevitable consequence of advancing technology and mechanized warfare. However, recognizing the significant contributions and sacrifices of these war horses is essential for a comprehensive understanding of the war. The continued use of horses was a fundamental aspect of the German army, and appreciating this complexity is crucial for understanding the true nature of the Blitzkrieg and the broader Nazi war effort. Also, please remember to check out today's video sponsor, World of Warships. The game will be linked in the description below. And that brings this video to a close. A massive thank you for joining me today to explore this lesser known yet very important lesson about World War II. As always, please remember to hit that like button and subscribe. It helps me and the channel immensely. I upload new videos almost every week, so you can always expect fresh content. A big thank you to my Patreons for their support. I'll link my Patreon and Instagram below, where I post extra content daily. Finally, I hope to see you on the next adventure. Goodbye for now.